A farmer's son stops a gang from robbing a gas station, but the next day, FBI agents show up at his door with a shocking offer. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The late summer sun cast a warm glow over the rolling fields of the Johnson family farm, illuminating rows of corn and soybeans that stretched all the way to the horizon. 19-year-old Jake Johnson wiped the sweat from his brow as he helped his father, Paul, repair a broken section of fencing near the property's edge. Jake might have been young, but hard work was in his blood. Growing up on this land, he had learned the value of diligence, respect, and the simple joys of an honest day's labor. He had also learned something else, how to be quick on his feet when trouble came lurking. In a rural community, law enforcement response could be slow, so folks had a habit of looking out for themselves and each other. Jake's father, a reserved man who spoke mostly through his actions, had quietly passed down a few skills he'd picked up during his own younger days. Paul never talked much about that distant time, but sometimes in the hushed hours of dawn, he let slip that he'd served in the Marines long ago, traveling to places he rarely mentioned by name. Jake finished pounding the final nail into the wooden post. Sweat trickled down his back, and the afternoon heat pressed in. Paul examined their handiwork with a discerning eye, then nodded in quiet approval. That wordless gesture of pride from his father always made Jake stand a little taller. "How about you drive into town and pick up a few supplies?" Paul finally said, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "We're running low on feed and could use some fresh seeds for the next planting." Jake smiled, dusting off his jeans. "Sure thing, Dad." Less than an hour later, Jake was on the road in his old pickup truck, a hand-me-down from his grandfather. The windows were rolled down, letting the country breeze wash over him. He glanced across the golden fields, the radio softly playing a classic rock station. Cornstalks rustled in the distance, and he hummed along to the tune, savoring the last weeks of summer before harvest time kicked into full swing. When he finally arrived at the little gas station on the outskirts of Maplewood, his hometown, population barely 2,000, he spotted a few cars at the pumps. It was a typical scene. Folks fueling up, neighbors chatting by the entrance, and Mr. Thompson, the owner, leaning against the counter inside. Jake parked next to a battered sedan, hopped out, and gave a quick wave to an elderly couple stepping out with sodas in hand. Then he strode into the station, greeted by the familiar smell of engine oil, coffee, and old linoleum. He reached for a shopping basket, heading to the small section at the back that sold livestock supplies, just some basic feed to tide them over until the next major run. But as Jake rounded the corner of an aisle, he heard something that made every hair on his neck stand up. Angry voices, hushed but tense, coming from near the cashier counter. Carefully, he peered around a display of potato chips. What he saw set his pulse racing. 3 men in dark clothes, each brandishing handguns, had corralled Mr. Thompson and 2 customers against the wall. One of the men, tall with a wiry build, was shouting threats while waving his gun at Mr. Thompson, who stood wide-eyed and trembling. Jake's first instinct was to step back before they could see him. He drew a slow, steady breath, heart thundering. Maplewood was not the kind of town where armed robberies happened often. Sure, petty thefts or occasional break-ins weren't unheard of, but brazen daylight robberies? That was something else entirely. He told himself not to act rashly. His father's voice echoed in his mind, cautioning him to weigh the risks before jumping into any fight. But even as adrenaline flooded his system, Jake knew waiting for the local sheriff might not be an option. The nearest deputy could be 20 minutes out or more. By then, Mr. Thompson or those customers might be in serious danger. Quiet as he could, Jake slipped behind a tall rack filled with tire cleaners and motor oil, inching closer to the group. He heard one of the gunmen demand money from the register, cursing Mr. Thompson for fumbling too slowly. "Move it, old man," or I'll put a bullet through your head," the tall one snarled. Jake surveyed the men's positions, one near the door, one by the register, one rummaging behind the counter. He felt the weight of possibility pressing on him. If he miscalculated, someone could die. If he did nothing, the same outcome might unfold. There was a sudden noise from behind the counter, a clatter of something metal dropping. The robber, searching for valuables, barked a curse, swinging his gun toward Mr. Thompson in anger. Jake felt a surge of urgency. He spotted a fire extinguisher on the wall, just a few feet from him. An idea flashed through his mind. He moved fast, ripping the extinguisher from its bracket. The harsh scraping sound drew the door guard's attention. The moment the man turned his head, Jake launched himself forward. He yanked the pin, squeezed the handle, and a cloud of white foam exploded across the man's face, blinding him. The robber's curses mixed with the hiss of compressed powder. Jake then slammed the heavy cylinder into the man's midsection, sending him sprawling. The second robber, by the register, spun around, gun raised. Jake dropped low, heart pounding. Before the robber could fire, Mr. Thompson mustered surprising courage. The station owner grabbed at the man's weapon from behind. There was a violent tussle, and the gun skittered across the floor, out of immediate reach. Meanwhile, the tall man behind the counter lunged over it with his handgun poised. Jake ducked behind a display of candy bars as a shot rang out, splintering the edge of a shelf. Shouts filled the air, the store's overhead lights buzzing ominously. Jake's chest constricted with fear, but a calm focus also took hold. He knew if these men regrouped, they could outmatch him. But scattered and panicked as they were, he had a chance. He scrambled on all fours, darting around shelves to keep out of sight. "Get that kid!" roared the tall one, swinging his weapon toward where Jake had disappeared. Another bullet ripped through a soda fridge door. Metal hissed. Carbonated water spilled onto the floor, fizzing and creating a slick puddle. Jake found the dropped gun lying near the cooler, half submerged in the spreading liquid. He hesitated. He'd fired weapons on the farm, sure. He'd hunted deer, taken out foxes trying to get at the chickens. But aiming at another human being was something he'd never imagined having to do. Yet the choice now might be between saving innocent lives or risking that these robbers would pull the trigger first. Steadying his breath, he picked up the gun, quickly checking the safety. Then he heard footsteps splashing through the spilled soda. He peered around the corner. The tall man was right there, weapon ready. Jake pointed the gun, bracing for a shot. The robber froze, their eyes locked in a heartbeat's tension. Then the man's mouth twisted into a sneer as if he was about to try something. Jake didn't look away. Instead, he hissed, "Don't move." Behind them, the first robber was still choking on fire extinguisher powder, groaning on the floor. The second robber had broken free from Mr. Thompson's grip and looked like he was considering rushing at Jake. But in a sudden flash of desperation, Mr. Thompson whipped the butt of the extinguisher across that man's back. With a shocked yelp, the robber hit the floor. That left only the tall one standing. His sneer faltered, replaced by mounting rage. But seeing two of his partners incapacitated, he lowered his gun. Barely. Slowly, he dropped it at his side and raised his free hand. His eyes darted around the store, likely searching for an escape route. Jake kept his own weapon aimed, every muscle trembling with tension. Time felt suspended in that moment. Could these men have accomplices outside? Had anyone called the police yet? Sirens wailed in the distance, echoing through the station's dusty windows. Relief coursed through Jake, though he didn't dare let down his guard. The tall robber realized the game was up. He cursed under his breath, letting the gun slip from his grip. Moments later, a swirl of red and blue lights illuminated the glass doors. Sheriff's deputies burst in, guns raised. They found Jake still holding the dropped pistol on the tall robber, who had his hands above his head. The other two lay groaning on the floor. For a fraction of a second, Jake feared the deputies might mistake him for one of the criminals. But Mr. Thompson shouted, "He saved us. He's the one who stopped them." Amid the confusion, The officers swiftly took control, cuffing the would-be thieves. One deputy gently but firmly disarmed Jake, patting him on the shoulder. The older man's eyes widened in recognition. "Jake Johnson? Paul's boy?" he asked, astonished. Jake nodded, adrenaline crashing through him. The entire confrontation had lasted barely 3 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Mr. Thompson stumbled over, emotional tears brimming in his eyes. He clutched Jake's arm and, in a shaky voice, said, "You saved my life, son." Jake gave a small, shaky smile, still trying to process everything. Just glad no one was hurt. He didn't realize how badly his hands were trembling until the sheriff's deputy guided him outside for a statement. Onlookers had gathered, neighbors and passers-by gawking at the spectacle. Word of the incident spread through the small town like lightning, and by the time Jake finished recounting his version of events, the local news van had arrived. A paramedic checked Jake over, shining a small flashlight in his eyes to ensure he was unharmed. Meanwhile, a deputy pulled the battered criminals off to the side, reading them their rights while they scowled and spat curses under their breath. Eventually, Jake got back into his truck, feeling an avalanche of emotions crash over him. Everything around him seemed both surreal and too vivid. The swirling lights, the murmurs of the gathered crowd, the memory of gunshots echoing in his ears. He was still reeling when another officer approached and said, "We'll need a formal statement at the station, but for now, go on home and rest. Thank you for what you did." Jake nodded absently. All he wanted was to see his parents and reassure them he was okay. He drove back along the dusty county road, headlights cutting through a now darkening sky. As he pulled into the farmhouse driveway, a single porch light glowed. The screen door banged open, and Paul Johnson rushed out, fear and relief etched into every line of his face. "I heard on the radio." "Are you hurt?" Paul demanded, grabbing Jake into a tight hug before he could answer. "I'm fine, Dad," Jake managed, voice shaking. "It was intense." Paul looked him over as though checking for bullet holes, then exhaled. "You sure got your old man's heart pounding." They went inside, where Jake recounted the story for both his parents. His mother, tears in her eyes, clutched his hand the entire time. The weight of it all settled in Jake's chest. He'd never expected to be in a life-or-death situation. But he reminded himself that thanks to his quick thinking, Mr. Thompson and the other customers were safe. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him. Jake slept fitfully, dreaming of swirling lights and clenched fists. When dawn broke, he awoke to the aroma of coffee. His mother had made a hearty breakfast, but Jake's appetite was absent. Instead, he watched the sunrise from the porch, trying to calm his restless mind. An hour later, the quiet hush of morning was interrupted by the crunch of car tires on gravel. Jake glanced across the yard. 2 dark SUVs rolled up, unfamiliar and official-looking. He stood, heart pounding anew, as men in suits stepped out. The lead figure flashed a badge that gleamed in the early light. "Jake Johnson?" the man asked, scanning a small notepad. "I'm Agent Foley with the FBI. We need to speak with you." Jake swallowed. FBI. Why would they come for him? His parents emerged from the house, alarm plain on their faces. Agent Foley gave them a polite nod before turning back to Jake. "Son, we've got a proposition for you. Something rather important." Jake's pulse hammered in his ears. 100 questions whipped through his mind. "A proposition?" he echoed, not quite believing this was happening. Agent Foley's gaze locked on his, calm and measured. "That incident at the gas station, from what we hear, took courage and skill," the agent said. "We'd like to discuss an opportunity you might find quite surprising." Jake stared at them, speechless. He thought yesterday's events were enough of a shock, but here stood 2 FBI agents on his porch at sunrise, talking about an opportunity. His father stepped closer, protective instincts bristling. Yet there was no threat in Agent Foley's tone, only a sense of urgency and intrigue. Jake took a breath, trying to find words that wouldn't come. Finally, he managed, "What exactly do you have in mind?" The agent offered a tight-lipped smile. "How about we step inside and talk it over?" Jake's mother, Rose, led the two FBI agents into the living room while Paul guided his son inside. Anxiety laced the air, thick enough that Jake found it difficult to meet anyone's gaze. He still felt disoriented from the previous day's events. The surreal nature of that robbery had left him on edge, and now these men in suits were telling him they had a proposition that couldn't wait. Agent Foley and his partner, a quiet man introduced only as Agent Ziegler, settled on the old couch, graciously refusing Rose's offer of lemonade. Paul stood by the window, arms folded over his chest. He appeared calm, but Jake knew his father well enough to see the flicker of protectiveness in his eyes. After a heavy beat of silence, Foley spoke, voice low and sincere. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson," he began, "we realize this is unexpected. We wouldn't appear on your doorstep without good reason." He glanced at Jake. "Your actions at the gas station, risking your life to protect strangers, speak volumes. We understand you have some experience with firearms, and you kept your cool in a crisis." Jake cleared his throat. I just did what felt right," he said softly. "I was scared out of my mind, but I couldn't let them hurt Mr. Thompson or those customers." Agent Foley offered a faint smile. "You showed composure few people display under extreme pressure. That skill is rare, and it's what caught our attention. Now, we can't go into all the details yet, but we're dealing with a growing wave of gang activity sweeping across rural areas. The men who tried to rob that gas station aren't just random criminals. They're linked to a larger network. We've been tracking them for some time." Paul shifted his weight, expression darkening. "Are you saying Jake's life might be in danger? That these people might retaliate if they find out who stopped them?" Foley nodded gravely. "That's a possibility. However, we also think Jake might help us by working in cooperation with our office, an arrangement that would protect him and benefit our investigation." Jake felt heat flush his cheeks. "What kind of arrangement?" He glanced at his father uncertainly. Ziegler finally spoke, his voice quiet and direct. "We run a specialized youth mentorship and training program that offers a safe path for young adults with unique potential. Typically, we recruit from law enforcement families, but after reviewing the incident footage, the Bureau believes Jake could be an excellent candidate. We'd provide structured training, legal coverage, and a chance to assist in ongoing investigations, especially in these rural territories." Rose frowned. "You're talking about putting him in danger again? He just got out of a life-threatening situation." Foley raised a hand in reassurance. "We're not suggesting he join active duty tomorrow. This program is about harnessing innate courage and composure, then channeling them properly. We'd never force Jake into anything, but with the criminals arrested yesterday, there's a strong likelihood that word will spread. It might be safer for Jake to align with us rather than remain exposed." Jake's mind whirled. One moment he'd been an ordinary farm kid, working on fences and hauling feed. Now the FBI was at his kitchen table, implying he might be safer under their watchful eye. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it, so he turned to his father. "Dad, what do you think?" Paul's gaze flicked between the agents and his son. "I spent time in the Marines when I was your age," he said quietly, "and I saw how the right training can shape a young person for the better. But I also know the cost. If you choose to do this, it's got to be your decision. You'll have to dedicate yourself fully. You can't back out halfway." Rose looked distressed, tears threatening. "Jake, this is your life. It's a big step. Are you sure you want this?" But Jake didn't have a concrete desire yet. He felt pulled in two directions: the safety of the farm, the familiar rhythms of planting and harvest, versus the excitement and danger of doing something bigger than himself. His heartbeat drummed a fast, uncertain rhythm. "I don't know," he admitted, voice trembling. "I'm not looking to leave home. But if these gang members are part of something huge and might come for me, or for you, I don't want to just sit around waiting." Foley offered a measured nod. "We understand. Why don't we let the idea settle in? I'll leave my card. Jake, talk it over with your family tonight. If you agree to meet with our training liaison, we can arrange a safe, private location. You'll learn what we expect, and you can decide if it's right for you." Jake nodded, exhaling slowly. His father showed the agents out, conversing in hushed tones near the porch. Through the screen door, Jake caught fragments of talk about background checks, protective details, and future visits. When Paul returned, his expression was guarded but not entirely opposed. They spent the afternoon in near silence, each one lost in thought. Jake helped his mother weed the garden, though he was distracted enough to accidentally tug up half a row of peas. Later, he walked the perimeter with his dad, ensuring gates were locked, and the entire time, he felt that gnawing question. If he said no, would his family be truly safe? And if he said yes, what dangers lay ahead? Eventually, he escaped to his bedroom. The walls there were decorated with sports trophies from high school and pictures of him and his friends at rodeos and fairs. It all felt suddenly small, overshadowed by the last 24 hours. He paced back and forth, replaying the agent's words in his mind. They'd described rural crime networks, armed robberies, and infiltration tactics. They wanted him, some random farm kid, because he'd managed to keep a cool head under fire. A swirl of emotions made him restless until dusk finally deepened outside. Over dinner, the conversation picked up. Paul asked steady, pointed questions, as if trying to help Jake weigh the pros and cons. Rose confessed her fears, but ended by saying she'd support him no matter what he decided. In the end, as the stars emerged over the farmhouse, Jake and his father sat on the porch steps, listening to crickets chirp. "If you join up," Paul said softly, "they'll train you. You'll see more of the world. You might even do some good for this community, ensuring people like those thugs never get a foothold here. On the other hand, we need help on the farm. There's always that. You're almost 20. It's your call." Jake leaned back against the wooden step, gazing out across the dark fields. Lightning bugs blinked and danced amid the corn. "I want to do something that matters," he murmured. "I can't shake the feeling that if I don't stand up now, I'll regret it. I love the farm, but maybe this is my chance to prove I can protect it, and everyone else." Paul pressed a hand to his son's shoulder. "Then we stand behind you, Jake." Early the next morning, Jake placed the call to Agent Foley. His voice wavered when he said, "I'll do it. Let's set up that meeting." Foley sounded genuinely pleased, instructing Jake to drive out to an abandoned airstrip north of Maplewood at noon for a preliminary briefing. Something about heading to an old airstrip put Jake on edge. But Foley assured him it was simply a discreet spot to talk. So, at midday, Jake parked his pickup near a cluster of rusted hangars, heart hammering in his chest. Sparse grass poked through cracks in the asphalt. A brisk wind rustled the neglected chain-link fence. Soon, a black SUV arrived, and Agent Foley emerged alongside a woman wearing dark sunglasses and a practical pantsuit. She introduced herself as Special Agent Clarice Powell, the training liaison. "Jake," she said, her tone crisp but not unkind, "let's walk." They strolled past a crumbling hangar, out of earshot from the SUV. Foley hung back, giving them space. Powell's stride was purposeful, and she wasted no time. "Here's the gist," she began. "We've identified you as a strong candidate for our specialized Rural Watch program. It's a pilot initiative the Bureau launched to combat gang expansion into small towns. That means you'd receive close combat training, advanced firearms instruction, and legal guidance. In return, We'd call on you if we ever need help setting up stings or identifying criminals who hide in communities like yours." Jake blinked. "So I'm basically an undercover informant?" Powell shook her head. "Not exactly. More like a community partner with official standing. We'll teach you how to protect yourself and your neighbors. Sometimes we might request your assistance if something urgent arises. We never want to put you in over your head, but given the criminals you fought are tied to a notorious gang, you can bet they'll have friends wanting payback." He felt a dull chill. "So even if I try to go back to normal, they could come after me?" Powell nodded solemnly. "We want to ensure you're not an easy target, Jake. This training isn't for the faint of heart, though. You'll be tested physically and mentally. Once you start, you're committing to something bigger than just yourself." He inhaled, scanning the empty airstrip. "And if I say yes, how does it begin?" "You'd head to a session next month at a facility upstate, run by federal instructors. It'll be several weeks. After that, you return home, hopefully better equipped to handle future threats. We'll keep in contact. And don't worry, we'll help your family with any protective measures if needed." Jake's stomach twisted in knots. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions about what guns he'd train with, about how hush-hush the mission was, whether his father's old Marine background was part of why they'd singled him out. But deep down, he already sensed his answer. Powell seemed to notice his confusion. "This is a big decision. Think it over carefully. We do background checks, full medical screenings. If you pass, you go on an accelerated track. If not, you walk away. No harm done." Jake swallowed, mouth dry. I want to do it. I won't run if these people plan to harm me or my family." Powell studied him a moment. "All right then. Let's start with some forms." She beckoned, and together they returned to the SUV. Jake filled out pages of information while Foley and Powell explained bits of protocol. After about an hour, they shook hands, told him they'd be in touch soon, and reminded him to keep this arrangement quiet. As the black SUV pulled away, Jake stood amid the faint smell of dust and sun-scorched tar, arms full of official papers. Driving back to the farm, he mulled over each detail. He had no idea what the next months would look like. Could he balance training with the demands of the harvest? Could he keep a secret of this magnitude in a town where gossip traveled faster than a bolt of lightning? That evening, Paul was waiting near the barn, sweat-soaked from a day's labor. Jake showed him the papers. His father read them carefully, nodding now and then. Eventually, he handed them back, a hint of pride in his eyes. "If this is the road you choose, we'll make it work," he said. "You'll come home stronger, more prepared. Just don't let it change who you are." Jake felt a surge of relief. "Thanks, Dad." He trudged upstairs, exhaustion clinging to him. Collapsing onto his bed, he stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd call the number Powell had given him, confirm some details, and face whatever lay ahead. But for now, he let himself drift, imagining all the ways his life had already changed, and all the ways it would change further once he took this step into a hidden world of rural crime fighting. Jake awoke the next morning with a strange mixture of excitement and dread swirling in his mind. He lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the beams of early sunlight cutting through his curtains. After a fitful sleep, he'd nearly convinced himself that all this talk of FBI training was a dream. But as soon as he rolled over and spotted the stack of papers on his nightstand, reality sank in. He was stepping into unfamiliar territory, one in which the lines between normal life and dangerous intrigue were about to blur. Despite the uncertainty, he felt a steady pulse of determination. If this was the only way to protect his home and neighbors, so be it. He made his way downstairs where his mother was already fixing breakfast. The smell of bacon sizzled in the air, and fresh biscuits were keeping warm in the oven. Rose gave her son a searching look, concern etched across her face. "Did you manage to rest?" she asked softly, sliding a plate toward him. Jake noticed the extra portion of bacon, a subtle sign of affection. He tried to give a reassuring smile. "I'm okay, Mom," he replied, his voice huskier than usual. "Might just need time to get used to everything." Picking up a fork, he poked at the eggs without much appetite. He kept replaying the conversation with Agent Powell, her calm explanation of what the Bureau expected, and the looming possibility that criminals might one day come looking for payback. Paul entered from outside, the screen door slamming softly behind him. He was already dressed in dusty jeans, boots stained with morning dew. "Got a call from the co-op," he said, pouring himself coffee. "They're wondering if we can deliver more corn by Friday. I told them we'd do our best. But with you going off for training soon." His sentence trailed off, and for a moment, Jake saw the wistful flicker in his father's eyes. Paul had counted on his son's help, especially since harvest season was around the corner. But he masked any disappointment with a quick shake of his head. "We'll manage," Jake nodded, dropping the fork and gulping a small sip of orange juice. "I'll still be around for a couple of weeks before the program starts, so I'll pitch in as much as I can." It was an attempt to reassure them both, though he wasn't sure if it helped. After breakfast, he phoned Agent Powell to confirm he was officially accepting the Bureau's invitation. The call was brief and efficient. Her tone was polite yet focused. She informed him that all necessary background checks were underway, and once everything cleared, a training schedule would be emailed to him. She also mentioned that part of this specialized instruction would happen in a location known only to participants and supervising agents, for security reasons. The finality of those words made Jake's stomach clench, but he steeled himself. By mid-morning, the day's normal farm chores took over. Jake hopped into the tractor, hitching it to a wagon loaded with bales of hay. The repetition of lifting and stacking brought him a sense of familiarity that soothed his nerves. As he worked, he thought about how different life had been just a week ago. His biggest worries were weeds in the fields and the upcoming summer fair. Now he was preparing to leave Maplewood to train with federal agents. It felt surreal, like a dream or someone else's story. Around noon, he took a break, wiping sweat from his forehead. That was when he noticed a dusty sedan creeping down the gravel road near the fence line. Slowing to a stop, the car idled for a moment before continuing. Jake squinted, uneasy. Could it be someone scoping the farm? He felt a prickle of paranoia. The sense of being watched didn't fade until long after the car disappeared in a cloud of dust. Later that evening, while Paul and Jake were finishing up in the barn, Rose hurried outside, her expression alarmed. "There's someone on the phone asking for you, Jake. A man who won't give his name." Jake and his father exchanged a worried glance. Ever since the robbery, the phone had rung non-stop, reporters fishing for interviews, townsfolk calling with supportive words, even a few who spewed hostility about vigilante antics. But an unnamed caller left Jake wary. He walked inside and lifted the receiver. "Hello?" A moment of silence, then a low voice. "I heard you were real brave at that gas station," the caller said, his tone dripping mock admiration. "I just wanted to let you know some folks ain't too happy about it." Jake's pulse quickened. "Who is this?" he demanded, knuckles whitening around the phone. "You'll find out soon enough," the man drawled. "Sleep with one eye open, hero." Then the line clicked dead, leaving Jake trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Paul was at his side in an instant, taking in Jake's ashen face. "Son, what happened?" Jake cleared his throat, forcing composure. "Just some crank call, threatening me for what I did." A muscle clenched in Paul's jaw, and he stepped toward the door, scanning the yard as if expecting danger to loom. "We need to report this. The sheriff and the FBI both said to let them know about any threats." Jake reached for a notepad, scribbling down the approximate time and the sense he got from the caller's voice. He handed it to his father. "You call the sheriff. I'll contact Agent Foley." Despite the knot in his stomach, he felt an odd relief that he'd decided to train. At least he wouldn't face this looming threat unprepared. The next days passed in an uneasy swirl. True to their word, the FBI sent Jake a confirmation packet via courier. It contained instructions for an orientation weekend at an undisclosed federal site 2 states away, starting the following month. They also attached a thick packet of legal disclaimers. Jake spent hours poring over them. Legally, he would be barred from discussing certain aspects of the training with anyone outside the program. Violations carried stiff penalties. This hush-hush approach hammered home how serious the Bureau was. His parents did their best to keep life normal, rising at dawn, feeding livestock, tending fields. Yet a subtle tension gripped them all. Neighbors dropped by to check on the Johnsons, bringing pies or groceries, as if worried the family might need extra kindness. Some visitors asked pointed questions about the robbery, and Jake carefully limited his answers to the basics. Word spread that he was involved in some sort of special arrangement with law enforcement. A few folks congratulated him. Others whispered that he was selling out, meddling in affairs bigger than he realized. Through it all, Jake tried to keep his head high. One particularly cool morning, Jake found himself alone in the barn, methodically brushing down the horses. The rhythmic strokes of the brush were soothing. He thought about how the program might transform him. Would he come back an entirely different person? Maybe he'd learn new skills and find a purpose he never expected. Or maybe he'd lose that simple contentment he'd always found out here on the land. Uncertainty hovered in the back of his mind, like a looming storm cloud. A sudden ring of his phone startled him. Glancing at the screen, he saw Agent Powell's number. He stepped outside to take the call, the late summer sun warming his shoulders. "Hi, Agent Powell," he said, voice strained with nerves. "Jake, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're moving up the timeline for orientation," she announced. "We have intel that the gang responsible for the gas station heist is targeting multiple small towns sooner than expected. Our higher-ups want to expedite your training so you can be under our protective umbrella. That means we need you to leave in 4 days." 4 days? Jake's heart lurched. He'd anticipated a month to wrap up harvest prep and prepare his goodbyes. That's quick. But if that's what you need, I'll do it." "I'm sorry for the short notice," Powell said gently. "This is how things go sometimes. You'll receive an email with details on your flight, which leaves from the regional airport. We'll reimburse all expenses. Just bring the essentials and plan to be gone for at least 6 weeks." Jake could barely breathe. "Understood. I'll be ready." When he hung up, he stared at the phone in disbelief. 4 days. That was barely enough time to explain anything to friends, let alone help finalize tasks on the farm. He walked back inside, feeling as though the barn had shrunk around him. That evening, he sat his parents down in the living room and relayed the new timeline. Rose's eyes brimmed with tears, but she remained calm. Paul pressed his lips into a thin line, nodding. "Then that's that," his father said. "We'll handle things here. You focus on training. Return to us safe, you hear?" Jake promised he would. In the following days, they worked non-stop to complete crucial chores before his departure. They harvested what they could, stored equipment, and arranged for a local farmhand to come help part-time. Jake spent evenings saying quiet farewells to the place he loved, walking the fields at dusk, leaning on the old fence to watch the sun sink behind the hills. Each step away from the farmhouse weighed heavier as he realized how much he'd miss this world of simple rhythms and hard-working honesty. Yet beneath the ache of leaving, there was a spark of excitement. He was stepping into something bigger, something that might save not just his family, but others in towns like Maplewood. Perhaps he could make a real difference. On the morning of his flight, Jake loaded a modest duffel bag into the back of his pickup. He'd kept his packing light, just clothes, boots, and a few personal items. He closed the tailgate with a sense of finality. Rose embraced him, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We're proud of you, Jake," she whispered. He hugged her back, swallowing the lump in his throat. Then he gripped Paul's hand, father and son exchanging a solemn nod. With one last look at the house he called home, Jake climbed into the driver's seat, heart pounding. He knew this day marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As he drove off, the silhouette of the farmhouse faded in his rearview mirror. He took a deep breath, letting the farmland slip behind him mile by mile. Tomorrow he would stand at the entrance to a place he'd never imagined visiting, a federal training center, top secret by all appearances, prepared to learn what it took to defend all he held dear. In that moment, he promised himself that no matter what challenges came next, he would remember his roots. No matter how deep he ventured into this new world, he'd stay true to the boy who grew up on a quiet family farm in Maplewood, believing in honest work and the power of doing what was right. Jake guided his pickup along the narrow highway leading to the regional airport, replaying each goodbye in his mind. The morning sun was still low, painting the sky in soft yellows and pinks. He tried to keep his thoughts on the road, but an undercurrent of jitters hummed in his veins. It wasn't just leaving home that spurred his anxiety. It was the unknown waiting for him on the other side of this flight. Would the training be as grueling as he imagined? Could he measure up to federal standards? He pressed his lips together and reminded himself why he'd chosen this path. To keep Maplewood safe from threats that lurked beyond any fence line. At last, the airport's squat control tower came into view, overshadowed by the bigger city an hour away. Jake parked in the lot, grabbed his duffel, and walked into the small terminal. Agent Foley had texted him a confirmation number for an early flight, so he checked in at the counter, received a boarding pass for a plane heading north, and found a plastic seat in the waiting area. Outside, on the tarmac, a handful of propeller-driven planes gleamed in the morning light. He was alone. No family here to see him off, but that was how the Bureau wanted it. Simpler, less risky. A calm female voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing boarding for his flight. Gathering his courage, Jake handed his pass to an attendant and strolled across the tarmac toward the small aircraft. Within minutes, the plane ascended into the sky, leaving behind the fields and silos that formed the patchwork of his hometown. Jake pressed his forehead to the window, watching roads and rivers shrink below. A pang of homesickness surprised him. Despite his restless desire to help, part of him clung to the comfort of routine. Sunrise chores, the smell of tilled earth, a mother calling him to dinner. But there was no turning back. The flight lasted just over an hour, culminating in a descent into a larger airport where Agent Powell waited at the gate. She wore a jacket and slacks, her hair pulled into a neat bun. Next to her stood a tall man in a casual collared shirt, lean but muscular, who nodded in greeting. "Jake," Powell said, stepping forward briskly. "Glad you made it safely. This is Special Agent Winters from our training division. He'll accompany us to the facility." Winters extended a hand, which Jake shook. The agent's grip was firm, and though he didn't smile, there was a polite tilt to his head. "Good to meet you," he said. "We've got a drive ahead of us, so let's get going." They left the terminal, weaving through parked cars until they reached a dark SUV with tinted windows. Jake hoisted his bag into the back, while Powell took the passenger seat and Winters slid behind the wheel. Once they were on the highway, Powell glanced at Jake in the rearview mirror. "This next step is standard protocol," she said. "We'll drive you to a remote location. You'll hand over your phone, sign some documents, and begin orientation." Jake felt a flutter of nerves. "Give up my phone?" "It's a security measure," Winters explained, accelerating onto a rural route. "No communication devices for the duration, so you aren't tempted to share details. We'll store your phone securely and return it when training concludes." Jake nodded, realizing how isolated he would be for the next 6 weeks. No calls home, no texts to check on his parents. The prospect was unsettling, But if that was the price to learn how to protect them, he would pay it. They drove for over an hour, the scenery shifting from farmland to dense forest. Eventually, Winters turned onto a narrow gravel road that wound deeper into the woods. Towering pines lined either side, their branches blocking out much of the sunlight. After several minutes, they reached a heavy steel gate. A uniformed guard in an unmarked car checked IDs before raising the barrier. Beyond the gate lay a hidden compound. Squat, nondescript buildings sprawled across a clearing, with watchtowers in the distance and a tall chain-link fence topped with razor wire encircling it all. Jake swallowed. This was no simple training camp. It looked more like a government base. Winters parked in front of a low concrete structure. Another officer escorted Jake inside, while Powell and Winters murmured with a man who appeared to be in charge of security. Jake was led down a hallway lined with fluorescent lights until he arrived at a windowless office. A stern woman behind a desk introduced herself as Administrative Coordinator Ellis. She had short, clipped speech and directed Jake to sign half a dozen forms: non-disclosure agreements, liability waivers, background disclosures, and more. With each signature, Jake felt a new weight settling on his shoulders. Once done, Ellis placed everything in a plain manila folder. "Return your phone and any other electronics," she said curtly. Jake handed over his smartphone, mentally saying goodbye to the outside world. He also removed a small flashlight from his keychain at her request. Ellis stashed them in a labeled bin. "You'll get these back at the end. Room assignment is on your pass." She slid a laminated badge across the desk. "Wear this at all times." Jake stepped out into the hallway, badge in hand, feeling strangely lighter without phone or keys in his pockets. He followed color-coded stripes on the floor that eventually led him to a modest barracks-like dorm. Pushing open the door, he entered a narrow corridor with identical doors on either side. A posted chart indicated which bunk number was his. Inside room 14, Jake found a small, tidy space, a metal bed frame, a desk, and a standing locker. A single window overlooked the compound's perimeter fence. He set down his duffel, tension coiling inside him. It reminded him a bit of a college dorm, except there was no sign of carefree chatter or personal decorations. The only sound was a distant hum of air conditioning. He didn't have long to settle. Soon, a knock sounded. Agent Winters poked his head in. "Orientation starting in the auditorium. Grab a notepad if you have one, then follow me." Jake locked up his new room and followed Winters to another building. There, they entered a large hall with rows of chairs facing a podium. Around 24 people, mostly in their 20s, had gathered. Some wore civilian clothes, others casual training attire. A sense of nervous anticipation crackled through the room. Jake picked a seat near the back, scanning the group. He wondered how many stories they had. Maybe some were recommended by local police or had prior ties to law enforcement. He felt an odd kinship, even though none of them had spoken yet. At precisely 10 o'clock, Agent Powell stepped to the podium. Her voice cut through the quiet, clear and assured. "Welcome to the Rural Defense and Readiness Program," she announced. "Over the next 6 weeks, you'll be immersed in intensive training designed to help you identify, report, and, when necessary, confront criminal elements that target small communities. This initiative is new, so each of you is something of a pioneer. But make no mistake, the stakes are high. Gangs and organized crime are creeping into rural areas, exploiting weaker law enforcement coverage. You'll learn to be the first line of defense." Jake's pulse thudded. This was bigger than anything he'd imagined. Powell introduced several instructors, former military, retired FBI, and local sheriffs with decades of experience in rural policing. Each briefly outlined their module: firearms safety, tactical driving, conflict de-escalation, intelligence gathering. With every explanation, Jake felt a mixture of apprehension and eagerness. He pictured the scenario at that gas station, except magnified tenfold. After the overview, the recruits were split into squads. Jake found himself assigned to Delta Squad, alongside 5 others. He noted a stocky man with a shaved head, a tall woman wearing athletic gear, and 3 other recruits with expressions ranging from excited to downright terrified. An instructor named Duncan, sporting a camouflage cap and a booming voice, motioned them into a smaller classroom. Once inside, he wasted no time. "I don't care why you're here," Duncan began, pacing near the whiteboard, "or who recommended you. Out there in real life, folks rely on you to stand firm when danger comes knocking. This training isn't a game. You need discipline, situational awareness, and respect for the chain of command. Understood?" They responded with tentative nods or murmured yeses. Duncan pressed on. "We start with physical assessments tomorrow at 500. Wear comfortable clothing. Bring your canteen. After that, we'll cover firearms protocol. I expect everyone to follow range rules. If I see any sign of recklessness, you're out." Jake's stomach fluttered. He'd spent his life working on a farm, so strength and stamina weren't foreign to him. But he was no soldier. This was a new league entirely. For the remainder of the afternoon, they received gear bags, uniform-like training attire, boots, and protective equipment. Jake changed into the plain tan fatigues, feeling oddly official. Then they trudged outside for a base tour. The compound featured multiple training ranges, an obstacle course, and a mock village for simulation drills. Chain-link fences and patrolling guards underscored that secrecy was paramount. By the time they finished, the sun was dipping low, painting the treetops in gold. Jake, exhausted, trudged to the mess hall with Delta Squad. Dinner was simple but hot: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, canned green beans. The recruits ate quietly, too self-conscious for chatter. Jake glanced around, wondering who was here for reasons like his own, some threat back home that forced them into a corner. Later, in the dorm, Jake sank onto the narrow bed. The reality of it all pressed down on him like a heavy weight. He was truly cut off from Maplewood. No phone, no updates about the farm. He could only hope his parents were all right and that no ominous strangers had prowled near his family's land. Darkness gradually cloaked the compound, and overhead lights illuminated the paths. Jake stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring the first test, a 5 a.m. fitness assessment, and a day crammed with weapon safety briefings. Anxiety simmered, but so did a flicker of resolve. He reminded himself that he was here so families like his wouldn't have to live in fear of violent criminals. If he could hone his skills, maybe next time, people wouldn't be blindsided by dangerous men showing up unannounced. Though the night was still, his mind buzzed with possibilities. He pictured the farmland, sunlight dancing on corn stalks, and told himself, "I'll do whatever it takes to keep that world safe." Then finally his eyelids grew heavy. Despite the rigid mattress and the unfamiliar environment, Jake drifted into a fitful sleep. Tomorrow he would begin shaping himself into someone new, someone who wouldn't hesitate when evil threatened. Because in a place where each second counted, he knew how crucial it was to react with courage, just as he had in that little gas station back home. Jake woke to the blaring of an alarm at 4:30 a.m. His eyes snapped open in the dimly lit dorm, heart thudding. For a bleary second, he wondered where he was. Then reality hit. He was at the remote federal training facility, about to face his first official day. His new roommate, a wiry guy named Miguel, who had arrived late the previous evening, rolled out of the top bunk with a muffled groan. The rest of the hallway filled with the shuffle of half-asleep recruits fumbling into their gear. Jake forced himself upright, ignoring the fatigue clinging to his bones. He tugged on the plain tan fatigues and laced his boots, though he fumbled with the knots. Back home, mornings started early too, but 4:30 was extreme even by farm standards. He reminded himself that discipline was crucial here. He had to prove he belonged. He and Miguel exchanged nods without speaking. They both headed into the corridor and followed the trickle of recruits down toward the facility's courtyard. Outside, a crisp pre-dawn chill brushed Jake's cheeks. The overhead lights cast long shadows across the pavement. In the center of the courtyard, an instructor barked commands, his voice echoing off concrete walls. "Move it! Line up along the painted stripes!" the man shouted. Jake recognized him as Duncan, the same instructor from the day before. Duncan wore a dark tracksuit and a stopwatch around his neck. A scowl tugged at his features, as though he believed nobody would ever be good enough. Jake took his place at the edge of Delta Squad. He glimpsed about 20 recruits total in the courtyard, forming 4 neat rows. Some, like him, looked apprehensive. Others appeared stoic, faces set with grim determination. Duncan walked between them, scanning every face. "Welcome to your first physical assessment," he declared, hands clasped behind his back. "We'll run a time mile, do push-ups, sit-ups, and more. I want to see your baseline fitness. Don't cheat or cut corners because you're only cheating yourselves." With that, they launched into warm-up drills. Jumping jacks, high knees, lunges. Jake's muscles complained at first, but soon warmed to the motions. His mind drifted momentarily to the farm, remembering the times he'd run through fields or pitched hay bales until his arms burned. Those chores, he realized, might have given him an edge. He pushed through the warm-up with measured breaths. Duncan blew a whistle, ordering them to the small track that circled the compound perimeter. 4 laps make 1 mile. This is not a race to show off. Just do your best. If you slack, we'll know. On my count, 3, 2, 1, go! They took off, feet slapping the asphalt in a ragged chorus. The early morning air stung Jake's lungs, but he found a rhythm, letting the farm strength he'd built over the years carry him forward. A few recruits sprinted ahead, only to slow after the first lap. Jake caught up to them steadily, passing them on the second. By the final lap, sweat poured down his back and his thighs burned, but he maintained the pace. He ended up finishing in the top quarter of the group, panting heavily but feeling proud. Duncan jotted notes on a clipboard, face impassive as recruits staggered across the line. Next came push-ups, sets of 20 at first, then more as the instructor tested each person's threshold. Jake's arms quivered by the end, but a stubborn will drove him to keep going. Farm life had taught him not to give up. Sit-ups followed, then a set of squats. By the time Duncan declared an end to the assessment, Jake's muscles felt like jelly. Yet relief mingled with satisfaction. He'd survived the first test. As they trudged back to the courtyard, the dawn broke across the horizon, turning the sky a pale orange. Duncan finally relented, letting them grab a quick breakfast in the mess hall. Jake found a seat at a table with some of the Delta Squad members he recognized from the day before. The tall woman in athletic gear introduced herself as Carly. A stocky man with the shaved head said he was Boone. Miguel joined them too, quietly wolfing down eggs and bacon. Carly asked, "Any of you have prior law enforcement experience?" Jake shook his head. "No, ma'am. Grew up on a farm. I guess that's my background." He felt self-conscious. Maybe the others had resumes better suited to this place. Boone grunted. "I was an assistant wrestling coach. Nothing official, though my dad was a deputy. Not sure if that helps." Miguel glanced up from his tray. "I used to volunteer with Border Patrol in my hometown. Helped gather intel. That's how I ended up here." Carly took a sip of coffee. "I was an EMT for 2 years, then decided I wanted to do more, especially after some gang violence hit my district. So, here I am." They nodded, a tentative camaraderie blossoming. Jake realized they were all people who'd seen trouble firsthand. This course might be a second chance, or the first step toward confronting the threats that had haunted them. After breakfast, the squads reassembled on a large stretch of gravel near the edge of the compound for firearms safety and orientation. Instructors with stern faces passed out training pistols that fired non-lethal rounds. They led the recruits through the basics, checking the chamber, maintaining muzzle discipline, and executing standard stances. For Jake, some of it felt familiar. He'd hunted and shot targets at home. But the thoroughness here was on another level. They stressed that while he'd used guns in a farm setting, this was different. Now the stakes were life and death, often in chaotic conditions. By midday, the sun blazed overhead. Jake's t-shirt clung to his back. The squads practiced firing at silhouette targets. The cracks of simulated shots echoed off the facility's walls. Between volleys, instructors barked critiques. "Square your shoulders, watch your recoil." Carly nailed several center mass hits, drawing an impressed nod from the range officer. Miguel's aim was shaky, but he improved with each round. Jake found that inhaling, then exhaling slowly before squeezing the trigger, steadied his hand. When the session ended, Jake's ears rang, but a spark of pride flickered inside him. The instructor, a grizzled ex-military type named Salazar, pulled him aside. "Good grouping," Salazar said with gruff approval. "Keep refining your stance." In the afternoon, they were herded into a classroom for theory and scenario training. Slides flashed on a screen, showing crime statistics in rural communities, robberies, drug trafficking, kidnappings. The sheer breadth of the problem was staggering. Jake's mind churned with the memory of that day in the gas station. He imagined how many times scenes like that were repeated across the country, often with deadlier results. Agent Powell gave a talk on recognizing early warning signs, forging alliances with local law enforcement, and maintaining confidentiality. "So many people assume small towns are safe from big city crime," she said, her gaze sweeping across the recruits. "But that's changing. Criminals exploit isolation, lack of immediate backup. Your role is to notice red flags and act before it spirals out of control." As the day wound down, Jake felt a sense of mission solidifying. Perhaps all his farm work and that moment of crisis in the store were stepping stones leading here. He wanted to ensure that neighbors, shopkeepers, and families wouldn't have to confront such danger alone. After dinner, the recruits received a short window of personal time. Some took advantage by running laps or hitting the modest gym. Others returned to the dorms to rest. Jake decided to wander the perimeter, seeking fresh air to clear his head. He soon found Boone leaning against the chain-link fence, gazing at the setting sun. "Mind if I join you?" Jake asked. Boone shrugged. "Go ahead." They stood in silence for a moment, watching pinkish light fade behind distant trees. Then Boone spoke. "Never expected I'd be roped into something like this," he admitted. "I always thought teaching kids wrestling was enough, but gang violence near our school changed my outlook. I felt powerless, you know." Jake exhaled. "Yeah, I do. We had a robbery back home. He paused, hesitant. This was all confidential, but Boone had shared something personal. Maybe it was okay to be vague. "Let's just say I saw trouble firsthand. And I realized if I didn't step up, who would?" Boone's eyes flickered with understanding. "Here we are then, learning to step up on a bigger scale. Kinda terrifying." Jake nodded, heart thumping at that truth. "But maybe it's worth it. If we can save lives, that's something." They parted ways. Returning to the dorm, Jake found the communal bathroom nearly empty, so he splashed his face at a sink. As he glanced in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Fatigue lined his features, a new gravity in his eyes. Miguel was at his bunk, flipping through a training manual. "Crazy day, huh?" he remarked, not looking up. Jake sat, untying his boots. "Sure was. It's only the start." Miguel slid the manual onto the blanket. "I've seen what gangs do to families. My cousin lost his life crossing paths with them. If this training helps me stop them from hurting others, I'm all in." Jake murmured his condolences, then recognized the quiet rage simmering in Miguel's voice. Many recruits here probably had personal stakes. He resolved not to let them down, to do his part and stand with them. Lights out came early, enforced by an overhead announcement. A cluster of new recruits shifted restlessly, adjusting to the Spartan bunk setup. Jake dimmed the single lamp near his bed, mind swirling with images. The morning run, the crack of gunfire at the range, the cautionary tales about criminals lurking in unsuspecting towns. So much had happened in one long day. He'd proven his farm-forged endurance and decent aim, but tomorrow would doubtless bring fresh challenges. As he stared at the dark ceiling, distant footsteps echoed in the hallway, a reminder that he wasn't home. This was a tightly controlled world where decisions had huge consequences. Yet in that tension, Jake found a sense of purpose. He was part of a mission that resonated with his values: courage, community, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Just before sleep overtook him, Jake felt the corners of his mouth tug into a slight smile. He might be exhausted, uncertain about the future, but he was on a path that could lead to real good. If the price was sleepless nights and grueling days, he would pay it. For Maplewood, for families threatened by criminals, for his parents who believed in him, Jake would not back down. The second week of training arrived with relentless intensity. For Jake, it felt like his feet never stopped moving. His heart never stopped pounding. Mornings started before dawn, with physical drills that pushed him to the edge of endurance, long runs around the perimeter, punishing sets of calisthenics, obstacle courses through muddy fields. By breakfast each day, he was already drenched in sweat, muscles shaking with fatigue. Afternoons brought technical lessons, firearms handling at different ranges, lectures on rural criminal networks, scenario-based exercises where instructors tested the recruits' ability to stay calm under pressure. They practiced clearing mock buildings, identifying potential threats among actors who played townsfolk or hostile gang members. Every mistake drew pointed feedback from instructors like Duncan or Salazar, who expected near-flawless execution. Though it was grueling, Jake found strange satisfaction in the grind. The structure reminded him a bit of life on the farm: early rising, hard work, respect for the land and each other. Except here, the stakes were measured in terms of life or death, not bushels of corn. Whenever exhaustion flared or doubt crept in, he recalled that moment at the gas station, how quickly danger had erupted. That memory fueled his resolve. If criminals set their sights on Maplewood again, he wanted to be prepared. Late one morning, Delta Squad was summoned to a cinder-block building on the far side of the compound, labeled simply Tactical Simulation. They stepped into a dimly lit chamber where an instructor explained they would face a timed scenario inside a recreated rural home. The simulation used paintball-like markers designed to sting on impact, but not seriously injure. Some assailants were placed inside, while other role players posed as innocent occupants. The objective: safely defuse threats, protect bystanders, and avoid being shot or shooting friendlies. Jake's heart pounded as they fastened helmets and protective vests. Carly, Miguel, Boone, and two other squad members formed a line behind a mock front door. The instructor set a clock. "You have 3 minutes to secure this building, gather survivors, and eliminate armed attackers. Ready?" They signaled readiness. On command, Boone threw the door open, and the group fanned out into a cramped hallway. Instantly, simulated gunfire cracked from a room to the right. Paint pellets splattered the wall inches from Jake's head, making him flinch. He and Carly ducked behind a corner, returning fire toward the silhouette that had appeared. Miguel took point on the left side, calling out, "Anyone in here? Show your hands." A frightened figure, an innocent teenage girl, emerged from a closet whimpering. The squad carefully ushered her to safety behind them. Meanwhile, Carly and Jake advanced on the armed silhouette at the end of the hall. Jake's heart hammered as he fired 2 quick shots, and the silhouette fell back, indicating a neutralized threat. But the scenario was far from over. Another hostile figure appeared in the kitchen, shouting curses, weapon raised. Boone returned fire, but missed. A short barrage of paint pellets whizzed by. One clipped Boone on the shoulder, leaving a bright orange splatter across his vest. He swore under his breath, continuing to move forward. Jake spotted a second unarmed role player in the kitchen corner, shaking and covering her ears. He shouted, Get down! Crawl to me! She dropped low, crawling away from the gunman while Carly suppressed him with covering fire. In seconds, the squad closed in, pinning the attacker behind a counter. A final burst of simulated gunfire ended the threat. The timer buzzed, signaling the end of the exercise. Sweaty and breathless, they regrouped. The instructor stepped in and scrutinized their performance. "Decent coordination," he said. "However, you risked crossfire in that hallway, and you almost shot a civilian who was moving unpredictably. Keep your trigger discipline tight. In the real world, that margin of error could cost a life." They repeated the exercise twice more, each time with new twists. An attacker feigning surrender, a frightened bystander dashing into the line of fire. By the end, Jake's senses were in overdrive. Yet he appreciated how these drills sharpened his reaction time. Even if the paint pellets were only a fraction of real danger, the chaos felt authentic. He realized it mirrored exactly how quickly events had unfolded at the gas station. No time to plan, only to act. When they finally stepped outside, the late morning sun felt blindingly bright. Boone rubbed his sore shoulder where he'd been shot and grumbled good-naturedly. Miguel shook his head, panting. "That was intense," he muttered, gingerly removing his helmet. "I kept forgetting where bystanders might hide." Jake nodded, removing his own gear. "Same here. Guess we'll learn to expect anything." They had a hurried lunch, then reported to a briefing on rural gang structures. An FBI analyst showed slides of the major criminal factions that operated in farmland regions, cartels using back roads for smuggling, local gangs recruiting disaffected youth, traveling crews that hit multiple small towns in quick succession. The more Jake learned, the clearer it became that Maplewood was far from alone in its vulnerability. That evening, after chow, Delta Squad gathered in a small lounge area to decompress. They sank onto battered couches, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. Carly sipped water and admitted she felt overwhelmed by the sheer breadth of criminal tactics they'd covered. Boone nodded. "It's like every time I think I understand one threat, they show us another." Miguel, however, seemed energized. "Makes me more certain we have to be prepared. There's so much going on under the surface. People in small towns rarely see it until it's too late." Jake sat quietly, recalling the tension of that phone threat from an anonymous caller. He hadn't told anyone here about that. He didn't want special treatment, but he kept it in mind every time training got tough. His enemies were real, not theoretical. Eventually, he said, "This might sound crazy, but I'm glad I'm here. Even when I'm sore or freaked out, I realize how crucial it is. I don't want anyone back home blindsided like I was." The others nodded, empathy on their faces. They shared a silent understanding that each of them had a personal reason for showing up. Before lights out, the squad discovered a surprising announcement in the hallway. They'd earned a single hour of monitored email access the next night, a reward for completing their initial phase. A buzz of excitement rippled through the recruits. Everyone missed their families, eager for even a brief connection to normal life. The next day, training continued relentlessly. Yet in the back of Jake's mind, that promise of sending an email home glowed like a beacon. He wondered how his parents were coping and if the farm was doing all right. On top of that, he wanted to reassure them he was safe. When evening came, Delta Squad lined up in a small computer lab. An instructor stood guard, reminding them they had exactly 60 minutes. No attachments, no mention of the facility's location, no revealing operational details. They could only send a short personal message to designated family emails, then log off. Jake settled at a monitor, typed in his mother's address, and stared at the blank message. Emotions tangled in his chest. He typed, "Mom and Dad, hope you're both doing okay. Training's tough, but I'm hanging in there. Wish I could call, but this is all I'm allowed for now. I miss you. Tell me about the farm and if you need anything. I'll be back when the program ends. Love you both. Jake." He read it 3 times, feeling the weight of all he couldn't say. Nothing about the compound or how he was learning to breach doors with a rifle. Nothing about the nightmares. He finally hit send. A second later, a confirmation message popped up. That was it. His single tether to home. The next day, Jake pushed himself in every drill, spurred on by faint relief that he'd at least touched base with his parents. His marksmanship scores improved, and instructors praised his steady hand in close-quarters scenarios. Once, during a break, Salazar asked if he had prior training. Jake shrugged, explaining he'd grown up shooting coyotes and foxes threatening the farm. Salazar grunted in approval. "Good instincts," he said. "Keep refining them." As the end of the second week approached, the recruits were introduced to a new segment: intelligence gathering. They filed into a converted classroom where Agent Foley waited. He'd arrived that morning, to Jake's surprise, and gave him a discreet nod as he addressed the group. In rural areas, criminals often blend into the population, using barns, empty storage units, or abandoned houses as stash points. Your job isn't just to confront them with force. It's to notice red flags early. A surge in strange traffic. Money flashing around. Missing livestock sometimes hints at bigger crimes. Your local knowledge can be crucial. Even picking up gossip at the feed store could save lives. He distributed handouts detailing patterns to watch for, vehicles with certain plates, folks buying suspicious amounts of fertilizer or chemicals, transient workers who never seemed to do real work. Jake recalled his father's warnings about trusting your gut if something felt off. This lesson formalized that sense, teaching them how to document suspicious activity without tipping off perpetrators. They also practiced basic covert observation. The instructors set up an outdoor range modeled to resemble a small farmyard, complete with a weathered barn, a rusted tractor, and some mannequins posed as locals. Recruits took turns pretending to be criminals or watchers, learning how to move unobtrusively, how to blend in while collecting information. Jake found it oddly reminiscent of how he'd stalk a deer in a field. Quiet footsteps, keen observation, patience. After one session, Foley pulled Jake aside. "Good job out there," he said, voice low. "You've got the instincts. Keep honing them. When you return to Maplewood, your role isn't about being a cop, it's about being extra eyes and ears." Jake nodded, grateful for the encouragement. "I just hope I can handle it without drawing attention." Foley's gaze was steady. "We'll guide you. If the criminals you encountered have deeper roots, we'll want your help identifying any sign of them. Don't worry. We'll coordinate so you're not alone in it." A flutter of uncertainty gripped Jake. Returning to Maplewood to play part-time investigator felt risky. But if it kept the town safe, he was willing. The second week ended with a formal evaluation. Each recruit stood before a panel of instructors who assessed their progress. Terse feedback followed: posture corrections, advice on dealing with stressful situations, pointers on interpersonal communication. For Jake, they noted a slight tendency to freeze momentarily under surprise attacks, a residual habit from the gas station incident. Salazar said, "But you've got courage. Don't lose that. We'll teach you to channel it properly." That night, exhaustion weighed on Jake like a wet blanket. Every muscle ached, and his mind spun. Lying in his bunk, he replayed everything: scenarios, intel lessons, gun drills. Yet in the mix was an undercurrent of pride. He was surviving, even thriving. The pain in his limbs meant he was growing stronger, more capable of defending the people he cared about. Eventually, his eyelids drooped. He thought about the final days to come, still weeks ahead of training, more challenges. Would it get worse? Probably. Would he keep going? Definitely. Just before sleep claimed him, he murmured a silent vow. He would pass every test, face every fear, because Maplewood deserved his best, and so did his fellow recruits, each with their own hometown story. If they could band together here, they might just stand between rural America and a rising tide of lawless danger. The third week of training barreled in like a locomotive, leaving no room for complacency. Jake could scarcely believe how quickly time had slipped by. Each dawn, he wondered how his parents were doing, if the corn harvest was on schedule, whether his mother was coping without his help. Yet he had no way of knowing. The only thing he could do was focus on the mission here, day by day, drill by drill. This week's curriculum shifted to more advanced tasks. On a brisk Monday morning, Delta Squad was directed to the motor pool, where several unmarked SUVs and pickup trucks were parked. An instructor named Reyes, small in stature but iron-willed, stood before them. He gestured at the vehicles. "Rural law enforcement often relies on standard trucks," he said. "Bad roads, long distances, unpredictable terrain. Today you learn how to drive in hot pursuit or in rapid escape. Any questions?" Boone raised a hand. "You mean we'll do off-road stuff?" Reyes nodded curtly. "Among other things, we'll practice controlled skids, evasive maneuvers, and high-speed turns. Don't worry, we have helmets." Jake's heart hammered with equal parts excitement and fear. As a farm kid, he'd driven plenty of trucks around fields, even in mud and snow, but never at the breakneck speeds Reyes described. Carly shot him a wide-eyed glance as they pulled on seatbelts and helmets, their squad piling into separate vehicles. Jake volunteered for the driver's seat first, figuring he might do better than average with his farm driving background. Reyes hopped in the passenger side, tapping a digital timer. "Follow the course. When I give the signal, you'll swerve around the cones, simulate a chase, then exit onto that dirt trail at the far end. Keep it safe, but don't hold back." Jake inhaled sharply. He started the engine, feeling the rumble beneath him. "Ready," he mumbled. The instant Reyes said go, Jake floored the accelerator. Gravel sprayed from the rear tires as they shot forward. Ahead, orange cones lined a curving makeshift lane. Jake gripped the wheel firmly, flicking his gaze between the path and the speedometer. The SUV rocked left, then right. Reyes barked directions. "Tighter on the inside. Now accelerate." While Jake wrestled the wheel, he nearly clipped a cone on the second turn but corrected in time, the vehicle lurching dangerously close to tipping. His pulse thundered in his ears. Finally, Reyes pointed toward the dirt exit road. Jake cranked the wheel, feeling the truck fishtail on loose gravel. At the last second, he remembered to counter-steer, steadying the slide. The SUV regained traction and tore down the trail. Dust plumed behind them. When they braked to a stop, Reyes glanced at the timer. "Not bad," he said, face impassive. "You handled that skid well. Next time, trust the brakes a bit more going into the turn or you'll wind up in a ditch." Jake's shoulders sagged with relief. He could practically feel his adrenaline surging. A new appreciation blossomed for rural police who had to drive like this while under fire. The rest of Delta Squad took turns, some doing better than others. Boone almost spun out completely, cursing loudly. Carly got top remarks for speed control. Miguel managed steady driving, though Reyes noted he was too cautious and might lose a fleeing suspect. By the day's end, Jake's mind was crammed with tactical driving tips. Brake throttle blending, high-speed cornering, scanning for hazards. He had dust in his hair, sweat soaking his shirt, yet he felt alive in a way that city folk might never understand. For him, the farm had always demanded a kind of practical skill behind the wheel, hauling trailers, navigating bumpy fields, but this training brought it to a new threshold. That night, as usual, he sank into his bunk, feeling the deep ache of fatigue. Yet his dreams were restless. He saw flashes of headlights on dark roads, men with guns around an abandoned farmhouse. He jerked awake in the quiet dorm, heart pounding. Moonlight spilled through the window. He wondered if there would ever come a day when he might have to chase, or be chased, across country roads. The notion both frightened and steeled him. The following morning brought fresh trials. Agent Powell herself arrived to lead a classroom session on building trust with local communities. She hammered on a point. A rural watch program only worked if townspeople viewed the recruits as allies, not intruders. You'll rely on them for information, cooperation, and support, she explained. If you come across as arrogant or heavy-handed, they'll clam up. So learn to listen. Earn respect. Jake scribbled notes. He thought about Maplewood, with its neighborly get-togethers and folks who prided themselves on independence. He could see how some might resent outside authority. If he returned flashing a badge, they might reject him. He resolved to remember Powell's words. Listening and empathy would be key. In the afternoon, they rotated to an outdoor range set up for scenario-based firearm tactics while driving. Salazar and Reyes supervised a training known as vehicle takedowns. Recruits sat in a parked car with a trainer, while another car, driven by instructors, would roll up, simulating a hostile approach. The goal? Practice commands, minimize shooting risks, and control suspects quickly if they exited brandishing weapons. Jake's scenario involved Boone as the driver, Jake riding passenger. They waited, nerves wound tight, until an old sedan approached. Through the windshield, they saw two instructor actors pantomiming suspicious movements. Then, one swung open the door, holding a paintball-style pistol. Boone and Jake sprang into action. Jake bellowed for the suspect to drop his weapon, while Boone maneuvered the car slightly in reverse to gain distance. They had to time it right. Too slow, and they'd be under fire. Too fast, and they might run down innocents if the suspect wasn't truly hostile. Shots rang out, hitting the driver's side door with paint splatters. Jake braced his training pistol on the edge of the window frame, returning fire. With adrenaline surging, he felt his hands shake, but forced himself to focus. He aimed low, striking the suspect's legs in the simulation, which counted as disabling him. Meanwhile, Boone swung their vehicle into a partial protective position. The second suspect stepped out, dropping his weapon in surrender. They yelled for him to lie face down. When the exercise ended, Salazar strolled up, arms folded. "Decent," he said. "You gave verbal commands loud enough to be heard, minimal muzzle wobble, but your reaction time to the second suspect was slow. Watch your periphery." Jake nodded, panting. Even a contrived scenario felt harrowing. He was grateful for the thoroughness of these drills. Mistakes here were just paint splatters. Out in the real world, a single error could mean tragedy. Later that day, the squads were called to a group debrief in the main auditorium. Agent Powell stood at the podium again, tension in her posture. "We've received intelligence," she began. "Multiple gangs are expanding faster than we anticipated. In particular, an organization tied to the same network that attempted that gas station robbery has been sighted moving contraband through rural corridors. Our superiors have decided to shorten this program by a week so we can place you in the field sooner. We'll intensify the schedule even more, so be ready." A ripple of surprise and apprehension passed through the recruits. Jake's stomach twisted. He thought of Maplewood. Was the threat rising there too? Carly and Boone traded uneasy glances, so they had to brace for an accelerated timeline, meaning even heavier workloads in the days ahead. True to Powell's warning, the training became more grueling. More night drills, less rest, new challenges each morning. Some recruits began grumbling. Midway through the week, a woman from another squad fainted during a particularly punishing obstacle course. She was tended by medics and decided to withdraw from the program the next day. The stress was too much. Jake felt the strain too. His limbs never seemed to recover fully before another round of punishing exercises, yet he clung to the knowledge that this wasn't just about him. Back home, real people could be at risk. If he walked away, who would guard that gas station next time? Around midweek, Delta Squad assembled for a lesson in covert approach. The instructors led them to a wooded patch behind the compound, where they practiced moving silently through undergrowth, using natural cover to get close to a target. One instructor, a retired tracker named Howling Wolf, showed them how to read footprints in soft dirt, how to step on rocks or fallen branches to avoid leaving noticeable prints. Jake found it oddly reminiscent of hunting. The principle was the same: patience, stealth, awareness of wind direction, and noise. Crouched behind thick brush, he listened to the rustle of leaves, the faint snap of a twig somewhere to the right. Carefully, he peered out. A volunteer sentry stood in a clearing 30 feet away, scanning with a flashlight. Using hand signals, Jake indicated to Carly and Miguel that they should remain still until the sentry turned his back. Then, in a smooth motion, they crept forward, each foot placed with deliberate caution. The thrill of moving unseen surged through Jake's veins. When they finally succeeded in reaching a designated tree stump without being spotted, their instructor whispered praise. "Good. Use the environment. Slow and steady." Jake's heart pounded from exhilaration rather than exhaustion for once. If there came a day when criminals hid in a barn or a field near Maplewood, he'd know how to approach undetected. That evening, a meager sliver of time was granted for personal tasks. As Jake changed into fresh clothes, he wondered if he'd ever get another email session. So far, they'd only had that single hour weeks ago. The instructors gave no hints about more. He settled on his bunk, mind whirling with everything he'd learned. Advanced driving, building clearing, field stealth. Yet an ache of longing for home persisted. Miguel, flipping through a first aid manual, caught Jake's gaze. "You all right?" he asked softly. Jake half shrugged. "Just miss my folks. Hope they're not worried." Miguel nodded. "Same. My mom's not in good health. I wish I could call her. But we're almost done now, right?" Jake exhaled, glancing at the calendar pinned on the dorm bulletin board. They had another 2.5 weeks, if the schedule shortened, as Powell announced. "Yeah," he said, more to reassure himself than Miguel. "We're in the final stretch." Lights out arrived. Jake lay in darkness, recalling the day's lessons. The tension of accelerated training pressed upon his chest, but he tried to see it as a sign they trusted him, that they needed him out there sooner. In time, he drifted off to an uneasy sleep, dreams again filled with half-remembered farmland scenes interspersed with sudden bursts of gunfire. Morning would bring new challenges. But each dawn, Jake rose. He felt a flicker of renewed determination. If criminals truly were spreading like wildfire, he would meet the threat head-on. And hopefully, when he finally stepped off that bus or plane back into Maplewood, he'd be fully prepared to protect all that he loved. Armed, not just with a gun, but with the hard-won knowledge of how to keep violence at bay in the quiet corners of America. Jake and his fellow recruits rolled into the compound's central courtyard at daybreak on a day that felt different. From the start, an electric tension tinged the air, and not just from the perpetual buzz of fatigue. Instructors wore stern faces, hustling squads together with more urgency than usual. The rumor mill whispered that the accelerated timeline meant a culminating set of field exercises, a chance to prove their readiness before they were deployed to their respective hometowns. Sure enough, Agent Powell and Instructor Duncan gathered everyone outside the main building, commanding silence with a single raised hand. "Listen up," Powell began. "Over the next 72 hours, you'll participate in an extended field operation. It'll simulate multiple real-life scenarios back-to-back, day and night. You'll rotate between tasks that test every skill you've learned, from covert infiltration and high-stress negotiations to defensive driving and emergency medical response." Duncan stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Delta Squad, you'll kick things off by heading to the forest perimeter for a staged hostage rescue. Then you'll move on to checkpoint patrol. After that, your next mission prompt will come via radio." He surveyed them with a hawk-like stare. "We won't give second chances. Screw up and you'll fail your final evaluation." Jake's stomach twisted, half excitement and half dread. He exchanged glances with Carly, Boone, and Miguel. They all wore the same determined expression. They'd come too far to falter now. Within half an hour, Delta Squad was loaded onto a battered old bus that rumbled away from the compound. An instructor drove, taking them through a winding track in the woods. They stopped near a clearing where a makeshift cabin stood, run down and silent. The group piled out, gear at the ready. Duncan appeared from behind a cluster of trees. "Your scenario: armed suspects have abducted a local family. You must locate the hostages, neutralize threats, and ensure no casualties." He nodded at Jake. "You're the lead on this one." Jake blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you," Duncan said flatly. "We want to see if you can organize a team under pressure." His heart hammered at the unexpected responsibility. He'd been part of plenty of group drills, but never assigned as the point person. Nerves fluttered, but he steeled himself. This was precisely the kind of leadership they needed in real rural crises. "All right," Jake murmured, stepping aside with Carly, Boone, and Miguel. "We'll approach quietly from the east side. Keep a lookout for guards. Boone, you circle behind to see if there's a back door. Carly, you take the left flank. Miguel, you're with me on the right. Once we're positioned, I'll signal." They moved out. The cabin stood maybe 50 yards away, a battered porch sagging under its own weight. Jake and Miguel crept along a tree line, scanning for lookouts. He thought he glimpsed movement behind a shattered window. He signaled Miguel to hold position while Carly and Boone advanced. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Jake swore he heard his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He crouched behind a fallen log, raising binoculars to check for threats. Just as he saw a silhouette by the window, Boone's voice crackled in the radio earpiece. "Rear doors blocked from inside. Might have to breach. I count at least 2 armed suspects." Jake inhaled slowly. "Carly?" he whispered. A slight pause, then her voice. "No movement on the left side. I'm set." "All right. Boone, stand by. Carly, watch that front. Miguel and I will approach the porch." On my signal, Boone breaches the back if possible. We flush them toward us or force a standoff. Everyone watch for hostages. They inched closer. A hawk screeched somewhere overhead. The floorboards of the porch groaned under Jake's careful step. He tried the door. Locked. He glanced at Miguel, counted down silently with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Then, with a forceful kick, he slammed his heel near the doorknob. It gave way, but not cleanly. The door splintered, leaving a partial barricade. At that moment, a flurry of simulated gunfire erupted from inside, blanks or paint rounds. Jake ducked, flattening against the porch wall. "Armed suspect at the front!" Carly hissed through the earpiece. She fired back, pinned near a rusted barrel. Jake shouted, "Boone, breach now!" A crash from behind the cabin signaled Boone's entry. More gunfire and shouts echoed in the small structure. Jake launched himself through the broken door, adrenaline surging. Inside, an instructor playing the suspect swung his weapon toward Jake. Jake fired 2 quick paint rounds, neutralizing him. He heard muffled screams from a corner room. Miguel slipped in behind him, scanning. "Clear in the living area," Miguel called. Jake spotted an open doorway leading to a dim hallway. He advanced carefully. Another suspect lunged out, paint gun raised. Jake barely managed to sidestep the shot. Carly appeared through a side window, cutting off the suspect's escape. 2 blasts of paint from her marker signaled the attacker was neutralized. Boone's voice echoed down the hall. "I found the hostages. They're in a closet, hands tied." "Any more suspects?" Jake asked, tension coiling in his chest. "None that I see," Boone replied. They gathered in the hallway to confirm the cabin was clear. Hostage actors emerged, trembling for effect. Jake felt relief wash over him. They escorted the family to safety outside. Then the scenario ended, and Duncan materialized, noting their performance. "Good coordination," he said gruffly. "Jake, your communication was clear. A bit slow on the door breach, but overall decent. Boone, next time call out the moment you spot the hostages. Everyone else, keep alert. Remember, if you rescue the hostages but lose a squad member, that's a fail. Got it?" They acknowledged the critique. Despite the criticisms, a sense of pride glowed in Jake's chest. He'd led them through an intense simulation without major mishaps. But there was no time to celebrate. Immediately, Duncan ordered them back on the bus for the next mission, a checkpoint patrol where they'd intercept vehicles on a dirt road, deciding who was harmless and who might be smuggling contraband. The realism was stark. A line of old cars driven by role players trying to pass as locals or criminals. Each time a car approached, Delta Squad had to interview occupants, watch for suspicious behavior, and search the vehicle if warranted. Jake felt pressure mounting. Squad leadership seemed to be thrust on him again and again, possibly because of his farm background and decent shooting scores. With each car, he'd wave them forward, ask questions politely, yet remain vigilant. A few times, a driver pretended to be a harmless elderly man, but upon further inspection, they'd find guns hidden under blankets in the trunk. In one case, a mother with 2 young kids in the back seat tested their courtesy skills. They had to let her go quickly, rather than cause undue stress. By dusk, after hours of kneeling by car windows, scanning trunks, they were exhausted. And still, the instructors pressed on. The final part of the day's exercise was a timed intelligence run. They had to identify a hidden stash site in the woods based on vague clues. Splitting into pairs, they combed the forest. Darkness spread, making the search eerie. Jake and Miguel used flashlights sparingly, recalling their stealth lessons. Finally, near a rotting stump, they discovered a camouflaged box, the contraband. When they returned to the compound well past midnight, the recruits were on the edge of collapse. They'd been at it nearly 18 hours straight. Even so, the instructors had them debrief in a makeshift command post, discussing strengths, weaknesses, and lessons learned. Jake struggled to keep his eyes open. By the time they crawled into their bunks, they had maybe 4 hours to rest before the next rotation. Carly murmured that she'd never felt so tired in her life. Boone and Miguel said nothing, just grimaces of shared exhaustion. For Jake, his body ached in places he hadn't known existed. But beneath that pain lay a growing sense of competence. If these back-to-back drills mirrored real emergencies, then Maplewood needed him to be as well prepared as possible. The next day they continued in much the same vein. Rapid deployments to new scenarios, minimal downtime. One exercise simulated an active shooter at a local fairground, with crowds of panicked civilians to protect. Another tested them on emergency medical skills. They had to stabilize an injured bystander in a mock farm accident while suspecting foul play. Each challenge stretched them mentally and physically. On the final evening of the 72-hour gauntlet, Delta Squad found themselves on a hilltop clearing, waiting for a mock helicopter extraction that was just a transport truck with floodlights. The night air was crisp, stars bright overhead. Jake's legs trembled from fatigue, his eyelids heavy. Carly dropped onto a patch of grass with a long exhale. "We did it, guys," she mumbled. "Somehow." Miguel nodded, wiping dirt off his face. "If this doesn't prepare us for real life, I don't know what will." Boone gave a tired grin. "Better than my wrestling drills, that's for sure." Jake, too drained to speak, gazed up at the stars. In that moment, an enormous rush of gratitude washed over him. Gratitude that they'd made it this far without quitting. Gratitude that soon he might be able to take what he'd learned back home. He thought of how these same stars shone above his family farm, how he used to lean on a fence post at night listening to crickets. The memory felt distant, but it fueled him with comfort. Early the next morning, instructors declared the field exercise complete. The squads returned to the compound for a hot meal and a chance to shower. Then came a meeting in the main building. Agent Powell addressed them. "We'll debrief you on your performance, and then you'll have a short recovery period. After that, final evaluations begin." Jake's weary mind barely processed the words. He plodded to the mess hall, almost delirious with hunger. Yet amidst the fatigue, a swell of pride lingered. They'd survived the hardest challenge yet, a constant cycle of crises. In a real-world setting, these 72 hours might translate to actual weeks of tension. The instructors had compressed it into a punishing marathon. He realized that in one more week, he'd be done. Done with the program, authorized to return to Maplewood as a newly minted, albeit covert partner to the Bureau. The prospect both thrilled and unnerved him. If a real crisis arose, would he be ready? He told himself he had to be. That was the whole point of this. Otherwise, what was the point of leaving his family's farm in the first place? Exhaling, he shoveled food into his mouth, letting the warm meal soothe his frazzled nerves. The next steps would be critical. He had to maintain focus, pass final evaluations, and keep forging the grit he'd need back home. Whatever challenges remained, he'd face them. Because this training was the last barrier between him and the criminals who lurked on quiet country roads, waiting for the chance to strike. Jake awoke on the final Monday of the program with a jittery mix of relief and dread. His bones still ached from the 72-hour exercise, and yet he sensed the end approaching. Recruits were given a half-day of recovery after that grueling stretch, a rare chance to catch up on sleep and nurse bruises. Some collapsed into bed, others limped to the mess hall, and a few visited the on-site medic for lingering strains. Jake did all three in quick succession, forcing down a hearty lunch before returning to his bunk for a blissful nap. When he roused, twilight was gathering, and the overhead speakers summoned everyone to the auditorium for a major announcement. Agent Powell greeted them at the podium, flanked by Duncan, Salazar, Reyes, and several other instructors. Her voice rang out clearly in the hush. "Congratulations, recruits. You've survived the most intense portion of our rural defense training. The next step is final evaluations, written, practical, and scenario-based, to confirm who's truly ready. Completion means you'll be cleared for deployment back to your communities. But let me be frank. If you fail or demonstrate recklessness, we can still dismiss you. We expect unwavering commitment." She gave them a brief, solemn nod before stepping aside. Duncan took over, his expression foreboding as ever. "Written tests tomorrow at 0600. Then we'll rotate squads through scenario labs for 2 days. If your squad doesn't maintain standards, all members can be penalized. Lean on each other, or you'll sink together." A restless murmur rippled across the crowd, tension coiling in the room. Jake spotted Carly chewing her lip anxiously, Boone clenching his jaw, and Miguel staring at the stage with steely intensity. They'd come this far. Nobody wanted to trip on the final hurdle. At 5 a.m. sharp the next day, they filed into a stark classroom, each assigned a seat behind a laminated desk. The written exam covered everything: laws relevant to rural jurisdictions, best practices for safe confrontation, clandestine observation, first aid, and more. The proctor instructed them to power through in the allotted 2 hours. Jake's mind swam with acronyms and case studies. Part of him remembered high school finals, except here, the pressure felt infinitely heavier. Getting a question wrong might someday cost lives, not just reduce a grade. He took a deep breath and dived in, methodically answering each question. He recalled bullet points from the lectures, the hard-earned lessons from practical drills. When time was called, Jake set his pencil down, heart pounding. He glanced around. Some recruits appeared grim, others relieved. The proctor collected their papers in silence, then dismissed them to wait for scenario assignments. Jake and Delta Squad had the afternoon off until their turn in the scenario labs. They congregated in the small lounge. Carly exhaled. "That test was brutal. I swear half those questions felt like trick statements." Miguel nodded. "I kept mixing up certain codes, but I tried my best." Boone rubbed his temples. "I'm more worried about the final scenario labs. The instructors said they can be unpredictable." Jake offered a half smile, trying to reassure them. "We're a good team. We'll handle whatever they throw at us. The real point is to show we can adapt." By evening, they were told to be ready before sunrise. Each squad would rotate through 3 scenario labs: advanced tactical infiltration, crisis negotiation, and an improvised final test whose nature was unknown. "Stay alert," Reyes warned them. "We'll be watching from hidden vantage points." That night, Jake packed and repacked his gear, mind racing through each skill set. He and Miguel double-checked medical supplies, gauze, bandages, a training tourniquet. Carly quietly recited step-by-step negotiation protocols. Boone fiddled with the training rifle, rechecking its attachments. Stress radiated from them all, yet an undercurrent of unity bound them. They'd come to trust one another through bruises and sleepless nights. Their alarm buzzed at 4 a.m. Crisp air stung Jake's lungs as they mustered in the courtyard, heads cleared by adrenaline. Instructors led Delta Squad to an old warehouse near the compound's edge, lights flickering overhead. Inside, the first scenario awaited: an infiltration exercise. They had to breach a building housing simulated gang members while rescuing a single hostage. The environment was rigged with tripwire traps and security cameras, forcing them to rely on stealth rather than brute force. Duncan supervised, face grim. "No paint pellets this time. You'll carry training rifles with flashbang simulators, but every movement's recorded. If you trip an alarm or injure the hostage, you fail. Good luck." Stepping inside, Jake was greeted by a musty stench, half-lighting and scattered debris. He signaled to Carly and Boone to sweep left, while he and Miguel crept right. Anxiety coiled in Jake's stomach, but he focused on his breath to keep steady. They moved slowly, scanning doorways, spotting a tripwire near some crates. Miguel carefully disarmed it, sweat beading on his forehead. In the dim corridor beyond, they caught a glimpse of 2 gang members patrolling with training pistols. Carly tossed a flashbang simulator that erupted in a loud pop, disorienting the suspects. Boone and Miguel advanced quickly, subduing them. Jake scouted deeper into the building, locating a locked room. Through a crack in the door, he saw a figure bound to a chair, the hostage. He gestured for the team to regroup. Then, with a practiced motion, Carly picked the lock. She'd shown surprising skill at such tasks. They rushed in, neutralizing the final guard with quick shots. The hostage actor whimpered convincingly. In minutes, they escorted the hostage out to the entrance, hearts pounding. A beep signaled the scenario's end. Duncan stepped from the shadows, nodding curtly. "No alarms triggered. Hostage safe. Suspects neutralized. Well done." Relief mingled with the knowledge that this was just the first challenge. Next came crisis negotiation. In a second scenario, the squad found a staged community center where a distraught father held a staff member at gunpoint, demanding financial aid. This tested their communication prowess. Carly volunteered to talk him down, while Jake and the others provided silent security. They had to remain visible but non-threatening, reassure the father, and maintain a calm presence. One slip, and the hostage might die, costing them a fail. Carly's voice remained steady, empathizing with the father's desperation, inching forward until he eventually surrendered. The instructors ended the exercise, praising her for effective de-escalation. Only one test remained. No one would say what it entailed. The squad was given an hour break to catch their breath. They lounged near a water station, trying to quell jittery nerves. Boone guessed it might be another extended field scenario. Carly speculated an advanced vehicle pursuit test. Jake said nothing, remembering Powell's words about creativity. The unknown felt ominous. At last, a runner arrived, telling Delta Squad to meet at the southwestern corner of the compound. They found a stretch of open ground near the fence, where Salazar and Powell stood waiting. A single black SUV idled behind them. Powell's expression was inscrutable, lips pressed into a thin line. "This final test," she began, "is less about your physical ability and more about how you respond when the lines blur. We'll recreate a scenario that's all too common in rural communities, a suspicion that criminals are staging on farmland, but you have limited backup. You must investigate, confirm the threat, and take action if necessary, whether that's calling for help, confronting suspects, or strategic retreat. Salazar gestured at the SUV. You'll drive to a designated site, a small mock farm we built months ago. We've placed actors to replicate local residents and possibly armed hostiles. You have no script. Gather intel, keep the peace if possible, but don't let criminals escape if they threaten lives. Understand? Jake felt a surge of anticipation. This scenario mirrored the real reason he'd come here in the first place. Maplewood all over again. He and Carly climbed into the front seats, Boone and Miguel in the back. Salazar radioed instructions. Proceed to checkpoint Bravo, turn left, follow the dirt track. You'll see the farm. Good luck. They drove out, dust swirling behind the SUV's tires. The entire squad watched anxiously through the windows. In minutes, they arrived at a clearing with a barn, a farmhouse, and a few outbuildings. Wooden fences enclosed a patch of land with some fake livestock props. It looked surprisingly authentic. No one was visible at first. Jake parked by the fence. Let's do a quick recon, he said, stepping out. Carly scanned the surroundings with binoculars. Boone and Miguel circled behind the barn. Jake approached the house slowly, calling out, Hello? Anyone here? The wind rustled a broken windmill. A side door banged open. A man in dusty work clothes emerged, squinting. He wore a cap pulled low, face partially hidden. Who are you folks? He asked, voice laced with suspicion. Jake kept his tone polite. We're with the Rural Watch program. Got reports of unusual activity around here. Mind if we ask you a few questions? The man hesitated, then spat. Ain't nothing unusual. I'm just an old farmer. But his shifty posture suggested otherwise. Carly joined Jake, noticing a second figure lurking behind the windows inside. They glimpsed a weapon-like silhouette. Tension spiked. Carly tried to keep the conversation casual. We're just checking in, sir. Do you have any visitors or recent deliveries? Deliveries? The man growled. I'm busy. Get off my property. Jake exchanged a glance with Carly. They needed more confirmation. He subtly keyed his mic, alerting Boone and Miguel to stand by. Then Jake took a careful step forward. Sir, we're here to ensure everything's safe. Could we see inside the barn? The man's lips curled in anger. I said get lost. He made a sudden move, reaching behind his back. Jake's adrenaline spiked. Could be a gun. He reacted swiftly, raising his training rifle. Hands where I can see 'em, he barked. But the man darted behind the door, yelling something in a low voice. Almost instantly, gunshots rang out, cracking the still air. A second armed suspect sprinted from the barn's side door, firing paint rounds. Carly dropped behind a rusted tractor, returning fire. Jake heard Boone shouting from behind the barn, engaged in another skirmish. Within seconds, the entire farm erupted in simulated chaos. Jake crouched, scanning for angles. He glimpsed the old farmer dashing for a pickup truck, possibly trying to flee. If he escaped, they'd fail. Jake sprinted along the fence, intercepting the path to the truck. Paint rounds whizzed by. He slid behind a pile of crates. The man leaped into the cab, engine roaring. Jake aimed at the front tire and fired a non-lethal marking round. It impacted, indicating a disabled vehicle. The man cursed, bailing out, firing wildly. Jake returned fire, striking him twice. The man fell, raising his arms to signal surrender. Meanwhile, Carly and Miguel cornered the second suspect inside the barn. A final burst of shots ended that threat. Boone secured a third suspect near a shed. The entire violent flare-up lasted perhaps 30 seconds, leaving the farmyard littered with bright paint splashes. Silence descended. Jake's chest heaved. He saw Carly wave from the barn door, panting. All clear. They regrouped, the scenario finished. Then Salazar's voice echoed over a loudspeaker. "Stand down. Good job. You engaged effectively without letting suspects escape. The main threat's neutralized. Prepare for debrief." Jake let out a long breath, shoulders sagging. The final test was over. They had done everything they could, used the skills hammered into them during the past weeks. He felt a profound sense of both exhaustion and triumph. Later, back at the compound, an instructor ushered them into an office for an immediate after-action review. Salazar and Powell commended their teamwork. "A few rough edges," Powell said. "But overall, you showed readiness. We'll finalize your evaluations tonight." Jake shared relieved smiles with Carly, Boone, and Miguel. They had passed their final scenario, this wild, improvised test that mirrored real rural threats. Now all that remained was to see if the Bureau deemed them worthy to graduate and go home. In the hush of dawn on the final morning, Jake stepped out into the compound courtyard, shoulders tense as he waited alongside the other recruits for news of who had passed. The cool air carried the familiar scent of pine and damp concrete, a setting he had grown to know as much as his own backyard. They'd spent the remainder of yesterday undergoing brief exit interviews, all leading up to this moment, the announcement of final results. All around him, subdued chatter filled the space, a mixture of nerves and anticipation. He glanced at Carly, Miguel, and Boone. They looked just as anxious. Instructor Duncan emerged from a nearby door, clipboard tucked under one arm. He raised his voice across the courtyard. "Recruits, line up." Immediately they formed neat rows, standing at attention despite their pounding hearts. A second later, Agent Powell joined Duncan, followed by Salazar and Reyes. The group of instructors faced the recruits with solemn expressions. For a moment, Jake's stomach felt like a knot of barbed wire. "Over the past weeks," Powell began, projecting her voice, "you've been tested physically, mentally, and morally. Today, we confirm who is prepared to safeguard rural communities under the watchful partnership of the Bureau. This isn't a graduation in the traditional sense. You won't carry a badge of the FBI, but you will carry our trust and the tools we've given you to detect threats, assist local law enforcement, and protect lives." Duncan took a step forward, scanning the rows. "When I call your name, step up and receive your final rating. After that, you'll be briefed on your next steps." He cleared his throat, then rattled off several names from other squads. Some recruits smiled or exhaled with relief. Others, hearing less favorable scores, appeared deflated as they trudged away. Jake held his breath, waiting, until finally Duncan read, "Johnson, Jake, passed with high marks in tactical response and driving, strong leadership potential." Jake felt a wave of relief so intense he nearly went weak in the knees. He kept his composure and stepped forward, accepting the handshake Duncan offered. A hush of pride and gratitude filled him. This was it. He had passed. Moments later, Carly and Boone were called. Both had passed as well, though Carly got special recognition for her negotiation skills. Miguel's name came last in Delta Squad. He, too, had succeeded, prompting a quiet grin to flash across his weary face. With that, the squad was complete. Jake's chest swelled, pride mingling with excitement about the path ahead. Soon they were ushered into a smaller briefing room where Powell and Salazar handed out final packets. Sealed envelopes containing limited instructions on how to contact the Bureau if serious threats arose. They were reminded to keep the details of their training confidential. "If you face a crisis, call the number inside this packet," Powell explained. "We'll coordinate. Remember, you're not law enforcement, but a support extension. Act responsibly." Later, they packed their dorm belongings. At midday, buses arrived to shuttle them to the airport. The sense of anticipation felt overwhelming. Jake needed to see his parents, to stand on the family porch with nothing but farmland stretching in every direction. He wanted to breathe real country air, not the dense tang of the training grounds. As he boarded the bus, Carly gave him a small wave. Keep in touch, all right? If we can have normal contact eventually." Jake shook her hand. "Absolutely," he said. "We're all in this together." The bus ride passed in a blur of farmland and towns, slipping by outside the windows. Recruits dozed or gazed pensively at the scenery. When they reached the airport, each parted ways. Some had connecting flights to states far away. Jake had a short layover, then hopped onto a small plane bound for the regional field near Maplewood. For the entire flight, his mind spun with memories of the training. Early morning runs, paintball stings, battered trucks on obstacle courses. It all felt unreal now, like he'd stepped into a new life. The plane touched down in early afternoon, and Jake carried his duffel across the tarmac. He spotted his old pickup, which his father had apparently brought that morning. To his surprise, Paul himself leaned against the front fender, arms crossed, waiting. Jake quickened his pace, heart hammering. Paul's eyes lit up, a quiet smile forming at the corners of his mouth. They embraced without words, father and son, relief passing between them in a wave. "Welcome home," Paul finally said, voice thick. "Your mother wanted to come, but I told her I'd grab you." He glanced at Jake's fatigues. "You look different somehow." Jake gave a self-conscious shrug. "I guess I am," he admitted, "but still me." During the drive back to Maplewood, Jake peppered his father with questions about the farm. Paul explained that harvest had gone smoothly, though they'd missed Jake's help. The local co-op was thriving, and the Johnsons had managed to sell a decent yield. "We've been safe, by the way. No suspicious activity," Paul added, almost as an afterthought. "But we got some worrisome phone messages a while back. We reported them to the sheriff. Nothing came of it yet." Jake's jaw tightened at the memory of that threatening call before he left. "Well," he said quietly, "I'm ready if they try anything again." When they reached the farmhouse, his mother rushed out to greet him, tears gleaming in her eyes. She swept him into a fierce hug. "Oh, Jake, I've prayed for you every day. Are you sure you're all right?" He nodded, emotions tangling in his chest. The house smelled of fresh bread, and the old dog came bounding up, wagging a frantic tail. Jake knelt, ruffling its ears, feeling a deep warmth that had nothing to do with training or tactics. Home. That evening, they ate a welcome-back dinner of roast chicken, garden vegetables, and homemade pie. Jake shared only vague details of his time away. Early mornings, physical drills, lessons on community safety. He kept the more intense experiences to himself. His parents accepted it without prying too deeply, sensing the boundaries. Later, he retreated to his old room. The familiarity of the worn quilt on his bed, the scuffed baseball trophy on the shelf, it all filled him with comfort so powerful it nearly brought tears. The next morning, sunlight cast long shadows through the barn's open door as Jake stepped inside to reacquaint himself with chores. He pitched hay, checked on the livestock, and settled into that old rhythm like slipping on a well-worn glove. Yet, as he worked, an undercurrent of tension remained. He might look the same farm kid on the surface, but beneath that, he was vigilant, scanning the tree line for vehicles that didn't belong, noticing footprints in the dirt that might not match a neighbor's. The habits from training wouldn't fade quickly. Days passed quietly, a welcome lull. Jake helped around the property, visited with neighbors who'd heard rumors he'd been away for some special program. He kept answers vague. Just personal development, learning some new things. People, for the most part, accepted that at face value. Mr. Thompson from the gas station insisted on giving Jake free soda whenever he stopped by. "You saved my life," the old man repeated earnestly, to which Jake responded with humble thanks. Yet not all of Maplewood was so friendly. One afternoon, Jake noticed a battered sedan parked at the edge of town. He recognized it from months ago, one of those suspicious cars that had trailed him. When he drove past, the occupant slouched low. A chill prickled his skin. Later, he texted Agent Foley using a discreet code they'd arranged, reporting the plate number. Foley replied that the Bureau would keep watch. Another day, Jake was returning from the feed store when a black SUV appeared in his rearview mirror, tailing him from a distance. He took a few turns to see if it followed. It did, for a block, then vanished. Each incident reminded him that the threat was real. Possibly the same criminal network was still prowling, seeking an opportunity for revenge. Despite the unease, Jake's father encouraged him to live as normally as possible. "We can't let fear own us," Paul said. "If we do, then they've won." So Jake worked the fields, attended Sunday service, and joined a few friends for a casual gathering around a bonfire. People teased him about disappearing all summer, but he laughed it off. Beneath his cheerful demeanor, though, he remained alert. The moment of truth came one late afternoon, when Jake stopped by Mr. Thompson's gas station to grab a cold drink. He chatted amiably with the clerk behind the counter, noticing only belatedly that a stranger in a hooded jacket was pacing by the snack aisle. Something about that man's stance set off alarms in Jake's mind. He recognized the uneasy posture, the tense shoulders of someone ready to erupt. The clerk shot Jake a worried glance. The stranger approached the register, gaze darting around. In a heartbeat, Jake saw a bulge under his jacket, likely a concealed weapon. Memories of the original robbery flashed in his mind. He stepped forward, carefully positioning himself behind the man. "Can I help you with something, buddy?" he asked quietly, his voice steady. The man spun, startled. A flicker of recognition crossed his eyes. He might have realized who Jake was. But instead of pulling the weapon, he backed away, muttering a curse. Then he bolted for the door. Jake kept a safe distance, memorizing the license plate of the sedan he jumped into. He decided not to escalate further. The man peeled out, tires screeching onto the main road. Mr. Thompson emerged from a back aisle, trembling. "He was watching me," he said, voice quavering. "You think he was about to—" Jake took out his phone, quickly texting a note to Foley's contact. "Probably. Let's just say we caught it in time." He gave Thompson a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "I learned a thing or two these past weeks." Driving home, Jake felt his heartbeat slow. Though no shots were fired, the tension reminded him how easily danger could rear its head. Yet he felt prepared, so much more than before. As he turned onto the familiar gravel driveway, a wave of gratitude rushed over him. He was safe, his parents were safe, and the training he'd endured had paid off in spades. That evening at supper, he told his mother and father in vague terms what had happened. Paul's expression tightened, but he trusted Jake's judgment. Rose looked alarmed, but said softly, "I thank God you're all right." Jake managed to smile. "Me too." Inside, he sensed that living under the radar, fitting in as an ordinary farmhand while quietly keeping Maplewood secure, would be an ongoing effort. He would do it gladly, for the sake of the community that had shaped him. And if the criminals tried anything again, well, they'd find a far more prepared opponent this time. After dinner, he walked out to the porch alone, gazing at the endless rows of crops rippling in the breeze under a setting sun. The sky burned orange and pink. A sense of calm and purpose blossomed in his chest. Months ago, he'd stumbled into a life-threatening robbery, never imagining how dramatically it would alter his path. Now, having trained under the watchful eyes of federal agents, he carried in him a quiet vow: to guard the place he loved, to stand ready when trouble threatened, and to do it all with the quiet humility of a farmer's son who refused to let fear dictate his fate. He slipped his phone from his pocket, letting Agent Foley know the suspicious car was gone for now. Then he stood in silence, letting the twilight deepen. In that gentle hush, he felt the chapters of his old life and new training merge. Tomorrow, the sun would rise on the same farmland, the same chores, but everything had changed. He was, after all, the same Jake, just equipped with sharper instincts, and the unwavering resolve to keep Maplewood safe, no matter what storms might come.